Alright, it's kind of early in the morning, but we're gonna try this anyways. So, we're gonna talk a bit today about software minimalism, Suckless, Terry Davis, and why they may be sort of off. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of why their software doesn't make a whole lot of sense for some users. So if you can't tell by this amazing, I forgot to scale this, but let's try that real quick. If you can't tell by my desktop, which you probably can't, but I am using Mate. Now, Mate is a pretty lightweight, desktop environment. It has a lot of features, except for some reason it doesn't have a uh, application launcher without tweaks, and I haven't figured out how to install that yet. So I'm using dmenu right now. But when you're talking about minimalism, right, obviously my desktop would be empty. I would do everything from a launcher. And I would be using something like DWM Prop 3 or whatever. I would be using a window manager, right? But one thing that I've found over the years is that I'm sort of drawing a line between usability and um, bloat, basically. Because obviously I'm not using every single feature of Mate. So what Suckless does is they try to reduce everything to as little code as possible, which is something Terry Davis always said, was try to do things in as little amount of code as possible, and that will make you more efficient or like a better coder or something. But I don't find that's really the case, and the reason why is because a lot of people that use something like DWM, they're not using DWM as it ships, because DWM as it ships barely does anything. So what they do is they patch in, they add patches to it by editing the code itself. That's how you configure DWM. The config.yaml or whatever is a fucking meme, or .c or whatever the fuck it was. But people will patch in, like whatever feature they need. And now not only are they downstream of the package, which is maintained a lot. So every time Suckless updates, you have to repatch, and it's really annoying. Obviously, you can have scripts do that for you, but you are now fighting upstream for features that you actually do need. So why would that be a problem, right? Why is spending another few minutes of your time each week less minimalist? Well, when you're thinking about software minimalism, you would need to at least have all the features you need. And so a lot of people will say, well, anything that has more features you need is bloat, basically. Like if it's shovelware for the most part. And it really depends on how you perceive bloat on your system, like because technically the kernel itself is bloat because it's got all these modules that you're never going to use. But it's also a modular kernel, so it's just not going to load them, and it doesn't impact your performance at all. For the most part, obviously, you can do some minor optimizations to make the kernel load faster. But, I mean, if we're just talking about desktops, like, what does it matter if XFCE loads in, like, 0.0001 more seconds than DWM or i3 or something? It doesn't really matter. So, I've been kind of thinking to myself, like, do I need a window manager? And I do like window managers. They're just kind of a pain in the ass for me to use. I'm always I'm always missing something, and I haven't gotten too deep into them yet. It's the same reason why I don't use like a terminal music player, is because I just have trouble setting it up. And yeah, that's a problem. So I just ended up, I was like, oh, I'll just use the desktop environment. And I've tried KDE, I've tried GNOME, which actually are extremely bloated. And right now I'm using Mate because somebody wants me to, and it's fine. Like, it loads super fast, it doesn't cause any issues. It's got all the features I need, so I don't have to. The only thing it doesn't have, obviously, is an application launcher, but I can just add D menu. And that was something I didn't like about minimalist software is you need 50 other applications to do what one application should be doing, you know? And that was something I never understood about it is, yeah, the Unix philosophy is do one thing and do it well. So why the fuck do I need to maintain 50 different projects to do one thing, or like to do 50 different things? You know, I can't, if something is offered that does 50 things in one package, why would I not install that package, you know? And that's why I think that minimalism is less minimalist basically is because they you need so many more things to do basic functionality, you know? So you're technically making it the opposite of minimalist by having so many different programs working in tandem when you could have just had one program do everything, you know? And that was kind of a change in philosophy I had over the years was I stopped thinking in terms of the Unix philosophy and started thinking more in terms of just what do I need? You know, what do I need to do what I'm doing? And I don't feel like Suckless especially offers that for me, you know. I feel like no matter which program I'm using from them, I'm gonna be like, why the fuck am I not using a normal program for this? Why am I hacking together, you know, screen or tmux or whatever and st just so I have scrolling in my terminal? You know, why is that happening? Or why am I adding all these fucking patches to the program when obviously the way it's shipped is the way it's supposed to be used? And I may talk about that someday. I may actually like install DWM and ST and all that and use them as they were made, you know, and try to go through how unsuitable they are for me as a daily. And I think that would be a fun video, like trying to use Suckless as intended. Because patching Suckless is basically being less minimal, you know? You are adding things to the program to make it usable for you. And so you end up with a completely different program by the end of it. You know, it's not. And that's kind of why I'm saying that when you're downstream from another project, like, you are no longer minimalist, you know? But obviously, people would argue with me about that till like the end of days. They'd be like, "No, no, I'm still minimalist. It's that makes me more minimal, you know, because I've got so many little programs doing what a big program would do. You know, it's more minimal, it's faster. But I'm like, you're kind of wasting your time, basically making a normal terminal emulator out of ST and tmux." That's the only example I have off the top of my head. I apologize if I'm repeating that, but I haven't really used Stuckless software in a while, and I have only kind of passing familiarity with it, which is why I don't use it. You know, I'm just not really too into it. But someday I will try to use their software, and I'll explain like what it does for me, and if you can use it as a daily driver, that would be an interesting daily driver challenge. But I've talked a bit about wasting my time today, and obviously I use Gentoo. So, you know, if I'm using Gentoo, why am I talking about wasting time? I waste plenty of time. And that's actually been my goal with this Gentoo install is to waste as little of my time as possible. So, unlike most people would say, they'd say, "Oh, you're supposed to compile everything." I'm like, "No, I use Flatpak for most things and binhost for the other." And that was actually a problem I ran into recently. That's going to be kind of an off tangent, but I was trying to run a World of Warcraft client, and for some reason Proton just won't work with it. So I was like, "Oh, I better go compile Wine," and I had to change my use flags to have ABI 8632. And when I did that, though, I it took forever to compile World because it was like 200 packages were changed by that flag, but basically Wine expected that use flag, and it didn't seem to mess up anything, so I was good. But it caused like one conflict, I think, two conflicts actually. And somebody was like, "Oh, why are you compiling Wine? Why not just use the Wine app image?" And that actually led to um, Fuse being a problem because Fuse currently is Fuse 3, which changed fuser mount to fuser mount 3. So I had to emerge Fuse colon 0. And actually, what I first did was I symlinked Fuse user mount, or fuser mount 3 to fuser mount, like the binary. I just added that to user bin and it worked fine, even though technically they're not binary compatible. So that was really funny. But yeah, I fixed that. And then it turns out that the YNAB image didn't work with my program anyway, so who gives a shit? So now I'm using bottles, which mostly works, so I just have to, it always opens up on the wrong side of my screen for some reason. It like opens up off center to the right. Well, that's a tangent for another time. Basically, I had to add some documentation yesterday to the wiki because it hadn't been updated for Fuse 3 yet. So, but we're talking about minimalism and like how minimal really are you? And that's something I've been thinking to myself a lot just because um and this is probably gonna piss Ham off, you know, I love you, Ham, but it's it's kind of a change in mindset when you switch from like actual minimalism to just using a DE, you know? And it doesn't have to be a DE. You can still use a window manager. Like i3 and Sway are very feature rich. I think Hyperlind is too. I just haven't tried it in a while, just because it never seems to work right for me. But yeah, like it's something that I'm going to explore more as I fuck around. You know, I'm going to try suckless software and see how it works as it is. You know, because I don't want to have to hack around what they're doing. You know, that's kind of that should be the point of the software you're using is if you can't use it as it's intended, then why the fuck aren't you just forking it and making it your own, you know? At that point, why aren't you using i3 or Sway, you know? Or Qtile or whatever instead of using suckless software? So, but I think that's kind of the point though, is that it's not supposed to be usable on its own. It's got to be even more minimal than that, you know. And this is actually to go on another tangent. I was helping somebody set up Windows yesterday. She was like, "Oh, do I use Windows 11 Education or Education N?" And I said, "Well, the problem with N is that that was made for the European government, and it strips out media features that you may actually need. I know I needed them for like Oculus or whatever." And I said, don't install the N version because you're basically going to need to install that software from Microsoft, and it's actually kind of a pain in the ass because oftentimes it doesn't work. So just go with the normal. Like, I don't know why the European government decided to strip out the one thing you actually needed, which was the fucking media pack. And then, like, there's no alternative to that. It's not like you can just install an alternative to the Windows Media thing. Like programs rely on it, so what the fuck? That's like stripping out part of your kernel and then being like, oh yeah, you'll have to find a module for user space somewhere. You know, you gotta like install the DKMS module manually or something. It'd be funny. Uh, then obviously that does happen, but you know, it would be like the European government forcing you to have a to like I'm like, who are you? What are you? What is the anti-competitiveness of that? What are you doing? You know, there's so many other things you could do with that, and actually, we're gonna try to think of some because I always make the argument that Edge is not bloat. You know what I mean? Because people will be like, "Oh, Edge is bloat. I don't use Edge, so why the fuck is it installed on my system?" Well, unlike Linux, where you have a package manager, and if you uninstall Firefox, it's not like you need Firefox to get it back. But Windows, let's say you installed Firefox and Firefox broke, and you're like, oh shit, I don't have a web browser. I don't have a second computer. What the fuck do I do? You know, I gotta like download Firefox on my phone and put it on the computer or something. You know, get the exe or whatever. And this has happened to me before. So Edge is there as your backup browser. You know, basically. And obviously Windows is insanely bloated, but I'm just saying that having a web browser pre-installed on your operating system is not bloat. You know, that's just something you need. But especially for Windows where you don't have a terminal to save you, you know, if something goes wrong. So like you need the browser to download the exe. Basically, that's how you do it on Windows. So for most users, if they uninstalled Edge and they didn't have a browser, they would have to reinstall. You know, that would basically be what you have to do. It's really I don't know, but Edge also gets used a lot for that fucking web search and all that other junk. It's annoying. Oh my god. But yeah, I think I've gone on enough tangents, but that was kind of my spiel on minimalism is make sure that the software you're using has the features you need and then go from there. Don't start from as little lines of code as possible and go up from there because the more up you go, the less minimalist you are, basically. All right, thanks. Bye.